Before we start this video, a large thank you to Kevin, Cleve, Edward, Max, Malik, Clarky, Nico Pera, and Enrico for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And an immense thank you to Mike Harden Games for their support this month on Patreon. Hello guys, in this video we're going to continue our archery system. So we made a little mistake in the last video, not a mistake, but I played Dark Souls, and right now if we hold the aim button, we actually ready the bow. And that's not what happens in Dark Souls. If you hold the aim button, you actually go into the aim camera. To ready the bow like this, you need to hold the RB button, and then you notch an arrow, and then you enter that stance. So we're just going to change this from is aiming, to is holding arrow. And we're not going to have to rewrite the code, because we can still keep the aiming functionality. We're just going to change what it does. So I'll show you. We're going to make this basically just notch an arrow, and we're going to make it so when we hold down the RB button, we actually notch an arrow onto the bow and hold it. So on the player combat manager right now, let's go and just right here where it says performing LB aiming action, just notch this out, because we're going to use this function in the future just to change the camera. But right now we're just going to erase what we have there, or comment it out rather. Okay, so now over here on the input handler, we're going to do a couple things. Let's separate these inputs for now. We're going to make an input for holding RB. I know the critical attack input already does that, but basically we're actually going to replace that, because with holding down the RB button, you can either perform or attempt to perform a critical hit with riposting or backstabbing, or you can hold an arrow if you have a bow. So I'm just going to duplicate the RB button here, and I'm just going to add on, I'm going to call it hold RB first off, and I'm going to change it to a pass-through and make it a button, and I'm also going to put a hold modifier on it. So we have to hold it down for X amount of time to actually activate it. And we're actually going to get rid of the critical attack input. You can actually delete it from here if you want to right now. In this clip I forget to, and I do it afterwards. We're just essentially replacing it with this new input that will do both search for a critical attack, and also if you're holding a bow or a ranged weapon, it will then notch an arrow or a bolt. So again, I'm just going to put the hold interaction on this, and then I'm going to get out of here and save it. And now we're going to jump back into the input manager, and we need to create a function to deal with this. So wherever you want to put it, I'm just going to put it right here. I'm going to call it private void handle hold RB input. And then let's put some logic in here. So we're going to actually put this on the enable. We're going to put two versions of it. We're going to say input actions.player actions.hold RB.performed equals hold RB input is true. But then we want to know when it's canceled as well. So when it's canceled, what we want to do is make it false. Because when we're holding down an arrow, we want to know when we let go of the hold so we can know when to fire the arrow as well. This won't matter so much for actually looking for a critical attack like a backstab or a post, but this is just an important part for actually knowing when to fire the ammunition we're holding, if we are holding any. So I'm also going to make a public bool. We're not going to use it in this video, but we will use it in the next one. And it's going to be a flag. I'm just going to call it the fire flag. And when we cancel that hold, if we are holding an arrow or a bolt, we're going to activate that fire flag basically. So what we can do also, while we're here, is copy and paste this and say when RB is canceled, change the fire flag to true, because then we'll know to fire a bolt or an arrow. All right, that's all well and good. Now let's go down here and let's put some logic into the handle hold RB input. We're going to say if hold RB input, and then we're going to open up some curly brackets. Let's put some comments here. So we want to check if we're holding a bow to make sure we're holding the proper weapon. So to do that, we're just going to say if player inventory manager current, or right hand weapon, equals weapon type bow. And then we're going to proceed with the decide action for a bow. And if not, we must be holding some kind of other melee weapon or some kind of weapon that can actually do a critical attack. So we're going to say hold RB input equals false, and then we're going to attempt a critical attack. And we can just copy the logic right from here and then put that right there. And now, as I said before, we can just delete this handle critical attack input, and we can delete the bool up here too, and we can actually delete the input back on the input layout that we have. So this will serve both holding down for searching for a backstab or a post, and now for using a ranged weapon. And I'm just going to go out here now. In this clip, I do believe I deleted it from the player controls, and then we're good to go. Okay, so what do we have to do next? So now we have it set up so we can hold down the RB button and we can move on to an action if we have a bow equipped. So now let's go ahead and create that action. And I think we have an error here, so let's just solve that first. Yes, okay, just erase this from the tick input, and we want to actually insert our handle hold down RB input into our tick input. All right, so now let's go and actually search, or create the action that we're doing with this. So under the player combat manager, I'm just gonna come down here where it says hold or handle RB action. I'm gonna make another one, public void handle hold RB action. And this will only be used if you have a ranged weapon equipped. Specifically, I believe the bow, because with the crossbow, you don't have to hold it down, because once you notch the bolt, you can just keep it notched. But this is only for the bow. So we'll say if player manager dot is two-handing weapon, we want to make sure we're two-handing the weapon to actually notch the arrow. We're going to say do a ranged attack or hold the arrow. And if we're not two-handing the weapon, we're just going to do a bow bash, which is just a melee attack. So I don't have an animation for that, so I'm just going to put some comments here and say do a melee attack. You can just use one of your placeholder animations if you want. I'm going to put bow bash here so I know what it means. Now let's actually further this logic. So when we say do a ranged attack, we actually mean notch the arrow. We're not firing it because we have to actually notch it first. So we'll make a private void perform RB ranged action. And we have to check for a couple of things in here. We're going to say if player status manager dot current stamina is less than or equal to 0 return. We don't want to be able to do this if we have no stamina. And then right below that, after we've done a stamina check, we want to say player animator manager dot erase hand IK for weapon in case we have some hand IK set. And then we're going to say player animator manager, and we want to set to make sure the animator knows we're using our right hand. So I'm just going to say dot animator dot set bool is using right hand true. Okay. Let's go to the character manager now, and let's rename this because I had it named to is aiming. Let's rename that to is holding arrow. And we're going to check to see if we're already holding an arrow when we call this. So let's go back over now to player combat manager. I don't know why I X that out. One sec. Okay, so on the player manager, let's change this is aiming to is holding arrow, making sure we're calling the right animator parameter on the update. And over here on the player combat manager, we're going to say if player manager dot is not holding arrow. Then we're going to want to do a draw an arrow action, which we don't have made yet. So let's just say if we have ammo, then we're going to draw the arrow. And if we don't have ammo, we're going to play an animation indicating that we don't have any arrows left or ammunition. We also want to fire the arrow when we release the right bumper. So let's actually go down here and we're going to say otherwise play an animation to indicate we are out of ammo. All right, that looks good. So let's actually make some logic now. Let's put this here first. Let's just say perform RB ranged action. Looks good. Let's save that. And now let's go over and create some new logic. Let's make a new script and call it ranged ammo item. And this is going to derive from the item class. And this is going to be the ammunition that our ranged weapons will use. So as is tradition, I'm going to start off my namespace, mine's SG, and I'm going to erase the start and update function. Now we're going to make a few headers here, and we're going to make a few settings. So first off, we need to know what ammo type we're using. So is this an arrow or is it a bolt? Is it a great arrow? Because different ranged weapons will need different kinds of ammo. Let's go to our enums, and I'm going to make a new public enum called ammo type. And the only two I'm going to insert in this video right now are an arrow and a bolt, because in the series I plan to cover the bow and a crossbow. So let's say arrow and bolt. Okay. Now back here, I'm just going to make a new public variable of ammo type. I'm just going to call this ammo type. And let's make another header down here for ammunition velocity. So let's see how fast it travels through the air, the upward force, the forward force. So we'll start by saying public float forward velocity. This is how fast it will travel through the air in a straight direction. I'm going to initialize this at 375 maybe. I might want to make that a bit more actually. We're going to try 550. And then I'm going to also make a public float for upward velocity. This is if you don't have, or if you have gravity enabled on the arrow. So it will, it can start off with a bit of a pop, then go down over time. And then we can make a public float for the ammo's mass that will dictate how fast it falls too. And then lastly, a bool for do you want to use gravity when this thing's flying through the air. If you don't, the arrow will stay straight the whole time. If you do use that option on false, you want to make sure it has no upward velocity or else it'll continually go up forever. Next, we're going to make a header called ammo capacity. And I'm just going to make the maximum amount you can hold at one time, the carry limit, to 99. And I'm going to make the current amount that you have on you. I'm just going to initialize that at 99 as well. We're not going to mess with subtracting those amounts until we actually go back and complete our UI system, where we can actually put items like this on our player's inventory and UI, and we can have a capacity of how much we're carrying. Next, we're going to make a header for ammo base damage. I'm just going to use the physical damage for now, so I'm going to make it float for it, and I'm going to make it initialized at 50, and I'm going to make some pseudocode here for magic damage, fire damage, lightning damage, and dark damage. I'm not going to do that because you guys should certainly know how to do that by now. It's the exact same thing as the physical damage. You can just add it in, but if you want more damage types on your ammunition, it's just the exact same. Just make sure you pass them through the take damage function. So on the header here, we're going to make another header. We're going to call this item models. Now we're going to use 3. We're going to use a drawn model or a loaded model. So I'm going to call this loaded item model, and this is the model that will instantiate on your character's hand when you draw back the bow. It will not have a damage collider. It will not have any collider or any rigid body, so it's just a model to demonstrate. And then we have our live model. This is the model that instantiates at the position of the bow and fires with velocity. It will have a rigid body and its own damage collider. It can do damage to targets. And lastly, we're going to have a penetrated or contact model. This is the model that will instantiate in the object that it strikes. And basically, it will just, say if it hits the player's leg, it will instantiate a model into the player's leg, kind of like the loaded item model. It has no damage collider or no collider, but it will just show that this part of the character has been struck. If you hit a wall, it will instantiate into the wall, and we can make some code to make it go in a random amount depending on the velocity, make it look really cool. So I'm just going to say the model that is instantiated into a collider on contact. Very simple, very straightforward. Okay, now we have all that done. Let's save that. I think we're good right now. We have to make a create asset menu up here so we can actually create this, and we have to make that derived from the item class, or else we can't do that. So let's say create asset menu. Menu name is equal to items/ammo, and that's fine for now. Excuse me if I sound very tired, guys. It's been a very long day. Okay, that's good. Save that. Now, let's go over into the character inventory manager. Let's make a public ammo type, or not ammo type, sorry, a public ranged ammo item, and let's just call that current ammo. And this is what we're going to check when we're actually going to fire our bow. We're going to make sure we have some of this left, and it's the right type. We're going to polish this up a lot when we get the full prototype of actually firing the bow down and drawing the arrow back and such. So, let's go into the player combat manager now, and let's go, yeah, that looks good. Go down here to the perform RB ranged action. So let's actually write some code here. If the player is not holding an arrow, then we actually want to hold an arrow. So we're going to say if player inventory manager.current ammo does not equal null, then we're going to notch some ammo. And when we do crossbows, we'll check for the type, but right now we're only doing a bow, so we don't need to check for the type. So we're going to say draw the arrow, and then else player animator manager dot play target animation, and I'm just going to play shrug just to indicate that we don't have any ammo, so it'll just kind of lock you in the position and make you susceptible to taking damage for messing up. I think I call that shrug. Yes, okay, cool. All right, so let's make the draw arrow action. So private void, whoops, not private void, draw arrow action. And what is the drawing arrow action? Well, we have to instantiate the model of the arrow, the loading model, on our character's hand. So let's say player animator manager dot animator dot set bool is holding arrow to true, because now we are instantiating an arrow and we are holding one. And then we can say player animator manager dot play target animation. Mine is called bow underscore two hand underscore draw 01. And I'm going to actually make that is interacting so we can't move while we're drawing the arrow. I feel like that would make archery a bit too broken. It's nice to be able to take damage when you're drawing the arrow. It kind of locks you in place. So I'm going to say game object arrow, actually I'm going to call that loaded arrow, equals instantiate, and we're going to want to instantiate the player inventory.currentAmmo.loaded model. So that's the model we're going to save under the item that will instantiate when you're drawing the arrow, as we just said before. And we're instantiating that at the location of the player's, it will be your left hand if you're always firing the bow, because the way it's set up, you're holding the bow in your right hand when you two-hand it, and your off hand will draw the arrow. So I will say player weapon slot manager.left hand slot.transform. And next we want to actually animate the bow, which we're not going to do until the next episode when we fire it. So I'm just going to put some pseudocode here for now saying animate the bow. And what do we need to do last? I feel like we're missing one thing here. Yes, okay, so we need to say player effects manager, and we don't have a variable for this, but we have to save this arrow under the player effects manager so we can delete it later after we've fired the bow, because we replaced it with the fired live model, and we're deleting the model that's being held in the player's hand. So I'm just going to make a header called, I can't call it current effects, it's too general. Let's make one for current range effects. And then just make a public game object called current range effects. And basically we're going to save this loaded arrow to this variable, and after we actually fire the bow and spawn the live arrow, we're going to delete this one at the same time. This just gives us a spot to save it. So we'll say current range effects equals loaded arrow, and we're good to go. All right, so now under versus draw the arrow, let's actually say draw arrow action. Looks good. Okay, looks good. Now if we go into the game here, now let's create a new item called ammo. I'm going to call this arrow. Item name arrow. And again, a lot of these things don't matter for now, not until we actually get to the firing portion, which is next video. But we do need to set up all the models. So I'm going to drag an arrow into my project here now, and I'm going to set it up. And I'm just going to treat it like a weapon. You know how we have a weapon pivot when we always create new weapons? We're going to do a similar thing with the arrow. We're going to make an arrow pivot so we can edit it, and that is not appearing there. Okay, I need to scale it up a little bit. So I have an arrow. I'm going to create an empty game object under it. I'm going to call it arrow. I'm going to drag it out from the actual arrow model. And now I'm going to unpack this prefab. I'm going to create an empty game object under this one and call it arrow pivot. And I'm going to drag the actual model of the arrow under arrow pivot. And then I'm going to save this as a prefab called arrow. And I'm going to rename it right now because we're going to do 3 of these. So the first one, I'm going to call it loaded arrow. Actually, we're going to call it arrow underscore loaded model. And then we'll make arrow underscore live model and arrow underscore penetrated model. So I'm not going to actually edit the other 2 in this video, and by that I mean the penetrated model and the live model. That'll be for next video. But again, just to reiterate, the live model will have a damage collider, a rigid body, and it will travel, have its own velocity. The penetrated model will instantiate on whatever the live model hits, and the loaded model just goes in the character's hand while drawing the bow. Okay, so now that we have that, looks good. Let's actually equip the arrow item to our character under the player inventory. I think it's right here under the quick slot items. Yes, it is. Let's put the arrow in there. Now we go back into our animator. I'm going to drag in my animations. Make sure they're on the override layer. So this is bow two-handed draw and bow two-handed fire. You don't need to check has exit time. Where's the foot IK? I'm so tired today. I just tried to check for the foot IK into this menu. Okay, that looks fine. Why did I do that? What am I doing? All right, so foot IK again. Now I think this should work. Let's just go down here where it says handle hold RB input, and let's say player combat manager dot decide or handle hold RB action, and we should be good to go. I'm gonna save that. Oh no, go to handle LB action, and right here where it says if player is holding arrow, comment this code out for is aiming, because we're gonna use this in another video where we actually make the camera zoom in and aim. But for now, just comment it out. And let's go into the game. Okay, so if I draw back the arrow, as you can see, it works. But the only problem is the arrow is in a really peculiar place. So let's pause the game. Click on the arrow itself. And just like you would with a weapon that you've made, edit the pivot. So the arrow is basically being held in the hand and it's being notched on the bow. Just play around with this. You might want to spend a minute or 2 to get it right. And I don't have my bow in a perfect position now, but I'm going to fix that in the next video when I actually animate the bow. But you want to get it so it's being held roughly in between the fingers on the offhand, and it's being rested against the bow near the hand that's holding the bow itself. And a nice gentleman made a comment saying, archers usually use their dominant hand to draw and not their offhand. And yes, that is very much so true. But because of the system we're using right now, I'm going to make the offhand the draw hand. If you guys really want me to, I can show you how to make it so even though you're holding the bow in your right hand, when you two-hand it and draw, you switch it to your left. It would not be that hard. But for the sake of the system we're using, I'm going to keep it this way. If you guys want the range animations I'm using, I have contacted a professional animator about it, and I think I'm going to release them for sale, and we'll offer both left-hand and right-hand variants. So now if we go into the game and we draw the arrow, as you can see, we are holding the arrow in our hand and we have it drawn. Now in the next video, we're going to animate the bow. We're going to make it so when we release the RB button, the arrow will travel wherever you're looking and will shoot into what you're facing, and we'll give the arrow some damage as well, and we'll do a couple more cool polish elements. So if you guys did like this video, do not forget to drop a like. It does genuinely help my series so much. And if you're feeling like a super champion, check out my Patreon below. And I will see you guys in the next one where we'll cover actually firing the arrow, doing damage, and hopefully we'll touch on aiming.